Thanks for tuning into the Dinosaurs Lately podcast, the dinosaur podcast that features periodic updates recapping the latest news on the dinosaurs. My name's Ryan Rogers, and this is the podcast that targets a type of dinosaur, tries to catch you up on everything that's been published on them lately. Welcome to the 9th of these interstitial episodes I've created to keep you up to date with all the dinosaur news while I'm not publishing episodes of the Juras-Sick Park-Cast, and I hope it makes you feel more up to date. Welcome to episode 9, Avialans, part 2, recorded March 14th, 2026. A continued thank you to Christoph Oakes of Snail. Check out his incredible albums on Spotify and Bandcamp. Today's intro is All I Really Want Is You, and the outro is Everything Just Kind of Sucks, from Snail's brand new third album, Toy and Bee. So 3 things. Before we get into the thick of things, first, I put together a little PDF on Ankylosaurs. If you'd like a copy, just send me an email and I'll forward it over to you free of charge. It costs you nothing to drop me a line and ask for it. It's ryansrogers@gmail.com. Second, if you'd like to request a particular family of dinosaurs to cover for an upcoming episode, let me know. And yeah, any feedback you guys have on me splitting these episodes up so they're not so damn big, if you like that, that's great. If you want them all in like one multi-hour shot, let me know. I'm interested in the feedback. I look forward to hearing from you. Alright, resuming in the Aptian age of the early Cretaceous from the first episode, our next 2 articles focus on the most famous of these fascinating feathered dinosaurs, the Microraptor. Microraptor is known as the most significant example of extended feathering on the legs of a paravian, both fossil and modern. It had feather arms, and feathered legs, and a feathered tail, but it's the arms and legs which create what appears to be 4 wings. That has researchers posing multiple theories as to what all these feathers were doing. The next article, New Information on the Hind Limb Feathering, Soft Tissues, and Skeleton of Microraptor, published in BMC Ecology and Evolution in April 2025, looks to add some more data to inform these theories. The authors analyzed 16 specimens of Microraptor, including 8 previously undescribed specimens, providing new information on the structure and number of hindwing feathers within a revised feather taxonomy, including revised shape of the hindwing, which displays feathers all along the hind limb, except along its pedal digits. The authors found 6 feather types and a, quote, proximal shift of the triangular wing portion formed by the long tibial feathers and the long metatarsal coverts that outlines the joint between the tibiotarsus and the metatarsus. They say, quote, this configuration does not exist in any extant or fossil bird or in any other non-avian paravian described so far, underscoring the uniqueness of Microraptor. The authors add, quote, building on previous studies, our work allows Microraptor to become one of the best-known early paravians with elongated hind limb feathers. This study makes progress in understanding the unique features found in early paravians, which promise many more insights as other taxa are described in more detail. They conclude that the configuration of feather layers is only found in Microraptor and, quote, the 2 layers of elongated and asymmetrically veined feathers linked to the metatarsus are more reminiscent of the forewing of modern birds than of any leg in other fossils in modern taxa. The new data suggests, quote, Microraptor had a complex behavior that made it adapted to arboreal and terrestrial habitats. The next Microraptor article investigates its gliding capabilities, published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in February 2026, called Microraptor Reveals Specialized Gliding Capabilities in Multiwinged Early Paravians. This paper introduces the interpretations that Microraptor was a glider or a powered flyer. Quote, it was unlike any modern flying vertebrate in having a multi-winged flight planform, which you and I can see when we observe both the feathered arms and legs. This paper investigated the gliding flight of Microraptor using updated wing shapes and rigid wing modeling in a conservative forewing and spread leg configuration. The authors reviewed the aerodynamic features associated wing plan form specializations of Microraptor during the different stages of gliding flight and calculated a quantitative estimation of advantageous, quote, forewing hindwing interactions for any multi-winged vertebrate flyer, expanding the scope of animal flight modeling. Ultimately, the study shows that Microraptor could have, quote, utilized aerodynamic features similar to what is seen in modern birds for a range of conditions that are realistic given current knowledge. This means Microraptor was equipped with the aerodynamics of modern birds, and if they were behaving in a particular way, could have employed the, quote, sophisticated flight dynamics of modern birds. It's possible. And if they were, which is a big condition, then it would evolutionarily, quote, push back the presence of these sophisticated flight dynamics to the early Cretaceous. They had an interesting hypothesis that the extra feathers on Microraptor's legs may have helped the animal to experiment, quote, more broadly with flight using different wing configurations, especially for the forewing, that could have helped this species transition to powered flight. In other words, powered flight was still in development at this stage, but the different approaches the Microraptor was able to experiment with due to its having 4 feathered surfaces may have informed powered flight going forward. Quote, in summary, this study breaks ground in understanding the origins of the utilization of wing-bound vortexes and interwing aerodynamic effects, elucidating what was behind the development and eventual extinction of multi-winged flight configurations in early birds and their close relatives, as well as what enabled powered flight to develop as we know it today. This next article is from the mid-Cretaceous, more than 13 million years after the Microraptor and the others, published in the journal Paleogeography, Paleoclimatology, Paleoecology in May 2026. That sounds crazy, can't be May yet. This must be a pre-publication or something, so good for them. The article is description of the first Mesozoic bird eggs from Korea and a new mid-Cretaceous theropod-dominated egg locality, in which a new ova species is named and described. Ongwanulithis aphaedoensis. The egg is named where ongwan is derived from the Korean for a jar coffin, which is a characteristic burial type widely used in the southwestern Korea, including in the Aphaedo region, particularly during the 3rd to 6th centuries. Quote, the morphology of the Aphaedo jar coffin and the fragmented pattern of its ceramic remains resemble those of the holotype specimen. Combined with the Greek ou, meaning egg, and the Greek lithos, meaning stone, the species name references Aphae Island, or Aphaedo, where the holotype and the referred specimens were discovered. Now, I generally don't care for stories about footprints and eggs, but that etymology is thorough and, frankly, kind of beautiful. So, Ongwan Ulithis is special because it's the first described Avialan-type egg from Korea, and its microstructure indicates that it was likely from an ornithuromorph species. Apparently, this Korean peninsula is abundant with a diversity of bird footprints, indicating that there were, quote, a wide range of taxa inhabiting this region for, quote, an extended interval during the Cretaceous, but there have been no egg fossils attributable to Avialae yet discovered. Ongwan Ulithis is known from multiple eggs from the Ilseongsan Formation, and through microscanning, features like a lack of ornamentation and 3 distinct layers in the eggshell suggest this is not just a theropod egg, but a bird egg too. The holotype KDRC SAE001/C, housed at the Korea Dinosaur Research Center, Cheonnam National University, is comprised of 2 blocks containing a single egg. Alright, flash, another jump through tens of millions of years, and we're in the Santonian age of the late Cretaceous, about 85 million years ago, where a new bird has been described. In the article, Cretaceous Bird from Brazil informs the evolution of the avian skull and brain, published in the journal Nature in October 2024. This new dinosaur has an incredibly preserved skull, which makes it very special and also gives it its name. Nava honors William Nava, who discovered the fossil's locality in 2004 and the holotype in 2016, and Ornis, which is Greek for bird, and Hestiae alludes to Hestia, the Greek goddess of architecture, regarded as simultaneously the oldest and the youngest of the 12 Olympians. William Nava's bird, who's like Hestia with its archaic lineage, but modern cranial geometry. The holotype MPM-200-1, housed at the Museo de Paleontologia de Maria, was uncovered from the Adamantina Formation. It's comprised of a complete skull articulated with the interiormost cervical vertebrae extracted from a block. It's described as an enantiornithine with a toothless skull. In a world where Mesozoic-age 3-dimensional fossil bird skulls are widely unknown, the authors say this is, quote, an exquisitely preserved fossil species whose skull is, quote, toothless and large-eyed with a vaulted cranium closely resembling the condition in crowned birds. The phylogenetic analysis machine recovers Navaornis as an enantiornithine, even though the, quote, overall geometry of the skull is quantitatively indistinguishable from crowned birds. This was surprising. Quote, the emergent cranial geometry of Navaornis shows an unprecedented degree of similarity between crowned birds and enantiornithines, groups last sharing a common ancestor more than 130 million years ago. Navaornis provides long-sought insight into the detailed cranial and endocranial morphology of stem birds' phylogenetically crownward of Archaeopteryx, clarifying the pattern and timing by which the distinctive neuroanatomy of living birds was assembled. In other words, the question of how birds evolved remains in question, but to observe that a member of admittedly a highly diverse clade of enantiornithines also features a very modern bird-like skull, despite it not belonging to the crowned bird lineage, indicates that the modern bird skull shape was already derived way back before enantiornithines and crowned birds split on the family tree back 130 million years ago, in and around the Hotarivian or Barremian ages in the early Cretaceous. Our next article is a review of a clade of dinosaurs called the Unenlagiidae, who are theropods of the southern hemisphere with stiff tails, reduced pedal unguals, and an elongated snout, and recognized to have had slender, elongated limbs. And in many depictions, they are long-snouted, wading raptors, like herons or storks, with a reduced size to that raptorial claw on their toes. The article Phylogenetic Relationships of Unenlagiidae Among Paraves, published in the Journal of Systematic Paleontology in August 2025, looked to use a more robust data set with new information on Unenlagiids to get a stronger grasp on the phylogenetic position in the theropod family tree. They say, quote, although our understanding of the anatomy of Unenlagiid paravians has increased in recent years, the phylogenetic relationships of South American paravians in the context of theropod evolution remain under discussion. There are several hypotheses, including one where the Unenlagiids are a subfamily of Dromaeosaurids, while other studies have recovered the group, quote, outside Dromaeosauridae but closely related to Avialae. With the latest data at their disposal, which included, quote, 24 new taxa to the data matrix, these authors looked to, quote, test the hypotheses regarding the phylogenetic relationships of Unenlagiidae among Paraves. Where did these raptors shake out? Quote, the revised character coding of available specimens of Unenlagiid paravians in one of the most used Coelurosaurian data matrices, along with the addition of new characters, results in drastic changes along the topology of the Paravian tree, emphasizing the importance of understanding the Unenlagiidae as representatives of the southern history of the lineage. They add, quote, the clade Unenlagiidae is recovered outside of Dromaeosauridae and nested in the clade Unenlagiidae with Holotypes. These names, right? Unenlagiidae is recovered as the basal-most Avialan clade. This new trip through the phylogenetic analysis machine brings these animals, which are commonly represented looking very Dromaeosaurid-like, to be less Dromaeosaurid than they actually are Avialan. Or, the common ancestor of both Unenlagiids and Dromaeosaurs was a turning point, where the Dromaeosaurs went on to be more like the raptors we see in Jurassic Park, while the Unenlagiids moved in a much more bird-like direction. An interesting point of discussion the paper brings up is the acquisition and loss of flight among Paravians, of which the Unenlagiids and Dromaeosaurs are both members. The new interpretation presented in this paper, quote, drastically impacts the interpretations of the history of the early acquisition of flight. They say, quote, on the basis that we recovered Microraptorians, Unenlagiids, and Neornithes as birds, our contribution could indicate that powered flight of birds evolved once at the base of Eumannoptera, or twice in Microraptoria and in early divergent members of Avialae, including Unenlagiidae, as was supported by previous authors. They continue, quote, if this option is followed, the loss of flight occurred in several taxa, including some short-armed Microraptorians, some small to large body size Eudromaeosaurians, Troodontids, semi-aquatic Holotypes, and mid to large sized Unenlagiids. The proportions of forelimbs appear to be a focus on whether an animal could fly, lost the ability to fly, or potentially regain flight after losing it in the first place, which is considered the least likely of scenarios. Short-armed Unenlagiids, for example Austroraptor and Holotypes, have larger body sizes, just like in the forearm reduction in other large-sized theropods like Abelisaurs, Carcharodontosaurs, and Tyrannosaurs, say the authors. Another reason forearms appear to reduce is hypothesized for the Holotypes, which show, quote, short arms probably as an adaptation to semi-aquatic lifestyle. That said, they also note, quote, several large-sized Eudromaeosaurians such as Dakotaraptor and Deinonychus retain relatively long forearms in comparison with Austroraptor or Tianuraptor. Ultimately, the observations from this new data set encourages the authors that Unenlagiids will be important in the study of morphofunctional changes during the acquisition of powered flight in the future. The next article is about footprints. Oof. And it's one we've already covered. Phew! You may recall in episode 8, Hadrosauroids Part 1, we had the article, The Holotypes of Patagonichornis, venetiorum, and Tridigitichnus inopinatus, vertebrate ichnotaxa, history of the patrimonial significance, from the journal Geoheritage in November 2025. In that article, 2 species of ichnotaxa animals, which are named based on their fossilized footprints, were described in academic detail. One of those animals was a hadrosauroid, maybe, and the other was a bird, Patagonichornis. There was a romantic story of a treasure hunt related to these ichnotaxa, and they were literally used in someone's sidewalk. If you'd like to revisit that colorful tale, you may return to Episode 8, Hadrosaurids Part 1. It's all there waiting for you. Patagonichornis derives its name from Patagonia, the land from whence it was uncovered, and ichno, which is Greek for trace, referring to this being a ichnotaxon, and ornis, which is also Greek for bird. Venetiorum is Latin for of Venice, where the fossils are presently located, making this the Venetian fossilized bird tracks from Patagonia. The holotype CICRN 15-IV-78-1 number sign 1 was ascensioned to be in the Centro de Investigaciones Científicas de Rio Negro, but it is presently held in the Giancarlo Ligabue collection in the Museo di Storia Naturale de Venezia Giancarlo Ligabue. It was uncovered from the Angostura colorata formation in Argentina, and it's comprised of a medium-sized tridactyl avian trackway. Now that these tracks have been formally described, the authors say, quote, the data serve as a crucial reference for the future research and conservation initiatives, promoting their patrimonial, educational, and touristic value. This work underscores the importance of the interdisciplinary collaboration for the study and preservation of paleontological heritage. Flying forward some more, we have reached the latest of the late Cretaceous, the Maastrichtian Age, the very final few millennia of the dinosaurs. Here we have a few more fascinating discoveries on the Avialans, beginning with the article New and Anti-Ornithine Diversity in the Hell Creek Formation, and the functional morphology of the Avasaurid Tarsometatarsus, published in PLOS ONE in October 2024. This describes 3 new large-bodied enantiornithines, 2 of which get new names. The first is Avasaurus darwini, which is known from a fossilized Tarsometatarsus, so not known from very much material, but luckily Tarsometatarsos are what Avasaurids are mostly known for. The phylogenetic analysis machine returned this creature as a species of Avasaurids, of which the other species is Avasaurus archibaldi. This paper describes a new third avasaurid, but the specimen isn't distinct enough to refer it to an existing species nor to erect a new one. The holotype DDM 15577.730, housed at the Dinosaur Discovery Museum, was uncovered from the Hell Creek Formation. It's comprised of a complete right Tarsometatarsus, and its name Darwini honors Charles Darwin, quote, whose momentous research and publications helped define the field of evolutionary biology, making this Darwin's bird lizard. The third bird is Magnus avis ecalacensis. In Latin, magnus means big, and avis means bird, and ecalacensis is in honor of the town of Ekalaka, Montana, close to where this specimen was discovered. And Ekalaka is Lakota for one who wanders. So Magnus avis ecalacensis means Ekalaka's big bird. The holotype CCM V2019.5.1, housed at the Carter County Museum, was uncovered from the Hell Creek Formation 2. It's comprised of a partial right tarsometatarsus, missing the proximal portions of metatarsals 2 and 3, and all of metatarsal 4. A single phalanx is preserved, though digit assignment is uncertain. And together, these 3 large Maastrichtian birds, quote, increase the known taxonomic diversity of the Hell Creek avifauna, but they also add to existing evidence that members of this species clade achieved proportionally larger body sizes near the end of the Cretaceous. Most of the enantiornithines from the early Cretaceous from Spain or China are, quote, similar in size to sparrows within the range of around 10 to 70 grams, and thrushes within the range of 20 to 170 grams. The largest was Pangornis, which was the size of larger members of the parrot family, between 600 and 750 grams. The avasaurids in this article are around 1,200 and 1,700 grams. So they're saying bigger than a big parrot. This is spanning into large seabird or large waterfowl categories. Quote, this increase in body size disparity towards the end Cretaceous is also observed in the Ornithuromorpha, the clade that includes Neornithes. It has been suggested that larger body size among Ornithuromorphs may have been a key contributing factor in surviving the end Cretaceous mass extinction. Although depositional environments yielding bird fossils in upper Cretaceous North American deposits are biased towards the preservation of larger organisms, this does not explain the apparent absence of larger enantiornithines in lower Cretaceous Lagerstätte, like the J-hole, which records larger birds like J-hole ornis and Sapiornis, but only small enantiornithines. Therefore, the signal indicating increased size diversity in the late Cretaceous is likely a genuine one. Remaining in the southern hemisphere and heading much further south, we have 2 articles about a very old bird. The first article is Cretaceous Antarctic Bird Skull Elucidates Early Avian Ecology Diversity from the journal Nature, published in February 2025, on the foot-propelled diving crown bird Vegavis iai, of Antarctica. This paper describes a new skull of Vegavis, providing new insights into its feeding ecology and exhibits morphologies that support phylogenetic placement among waterfowl rather than among ducks. And this kind of came up in an article in episode 1. The new skull specimen FARB 30899, housed at the American Museum of Natural History, is from the Lopez de Bertodano Formation on Vega Island in the Antarctic. Quote, the new fossil preserves most of the brain case, palate, rostrum, and mandible, as well as direct data on brain shape, shedding further light on the anatomy and ecology of Vegavis, and strongly supporting its placement within the crown clade of birds. Quote, Vegavis has an avian beak, with the absence of teeth and reduced maxilla, and brain shape, hyperinflated cerebrum and ventrally shifted optic lobes, and the temporal fossa is well excavated and expansive, indicating that this bird has hypertrophied jaw musculature. The beak is narrow and pointed, and the mandible lacks retroarticular processes. The authors say, quote, together, these features comprise a feeding apparatus unlike that of any other known anseriform, or duck, but like that of other extant birds that capture prey underwater, for example, grebes and loons. The Cretaceous occurrence of Vegavis, with a feeding ecology unique among known waterfowl and landfowl, is further indication that the earliest anseriform divergences were marked by evolutionary experiments unrepresented in the extant diversity. But not only that, new species of Vegavis are being named as well. In the article, New Species of Vegavis from Antarctica Highlights Unexpected Cretaceous Antarctic Diversity, published in the journal Diversity in January 2026, a new specimen MLP PV 15I752 is said to represent, quote, the best preserved skull reported for Cretaceous Neornithine and associated postcranial elements. Its name is Vegavis Gaitonesos, from the Greek words Gaiton, which means neighbor, and Nasos, which means island, in reference to the occurrence of this species on Marambio Island, neighboring Vega Island, the locality of the type species, making this Vega Island's bird's neighbor. The holotype MLP PV 15I752, housed at the Museo de la Plata, was uncovered from the Lopez de Bertodano Formation. It's comprised of a skull lacking the upper beak, with the left side damaged and the right side complete, a cervical vertebra, an indeterminate fragmentary vertebrae, ribs, incomplete right pelvis, including the pre-acetabular wing of the ilium, part of the pubis, and part of the ischium, part of the synsacrum, part of the femur, and half of the right tarsometatarsus. And there's also Vegavis nautopotosa, whose name derives from the Greek words nautos, which is south, and potos, which means longing or nostalgic, in reference to the sense of longing for Antarctica implied by the southern provenance of the fossil and its deposition in a northern hemisphere repository, which is the American Museum of Natural History. This holotype, AMNH FARB 30899, is housed at the American Museum of Natural History, which is the northern hemisphere repository, and was also recovered from the Lopez de Bertodano Formation. It was previously assigned to Vegavis aiai, and it is partial skull that includes its natural endocast, basic cranium, the interior portion of the palatines, a partial beak, and an almost complete mandible. The authors say they considered ontogenetic variation and sexual dimorphism carefully before naming two new species, but they believe the differences are taxonomic. Quote, a set of similarities and differences has been identified among species previously referred to Vegavis aiai, and the new skeleton described here. Ontogenetic variation and sexual dimorphism are excluded as plausible explanations for the entirety of the observed and morphological disparity. On this basis, the available anatomical evidence supports the recognition of three species within the genus Vegavis. Further supporting the interpretation that these were more loon-like than duck-like birds, the authors say there are indications, quote, that these taxa developed skeletal modifications consistent with increased bone mass and density. These features suggest that at least some of them were already highly adapted to a diving lifestyle. This would mean that there were a variety of Cretaceous birds living around this marine environment in the late Cretaceous. Quote, in line with our data, the Cretaceous marine environment of Marambio Island is interpreted as taxonomically diverse, hosting several species of marine diving birds of different sizes, each exhibiting distinct specializations within a shared ecological guild. And all right, finally, we're going to flash forward another 60 million years into the future from the end of the late Cretaceous. I've never done this before, but the next bird I'm reading about will only be about 7 million years old. Practically modern. It lived far outside the Mesozoic, so you might be wondering why I would include it in this sort of thing on dinosaurs. Well, it's because this is about a big extinct bird named Argentavis magnificens. This is the most notable species of the Dromaeosauridae, an extinct bird family likely related to condors and vultures. If you're wondering, Dromaeosauridae is Greek for monstrous birds. Imagine Argentavis, not surprisingly somewhere in Argentina, with a wingspan of upwards of 8 meters, which is 26 feet wide. What is that comparable to? That's like, imagine a 26-foot U-Haul truck. Its wingspan was the size of a moving van. And it might have weighed 80 kilograms or like 175 pounds. Argentavis is possibly the largest bird ever. Our final article today is Insights into Argentavis magnificens lifestyle based on neuroanatomy, published in the Journal of Anatomy in December 2024. Using an endocast of its skull reconstructed from computed tomography scans, Argentavis was compared, quote, to that of other bird species of zoophagous feeding habits with different flight styles. The authors say, its brain generally resembles that of condors, who have incredible olfactory senses, but the endocast is different in a meaningful way. Quote, structures closely related to the perception of visual information, which are more similar to those of diurnal birds of prey and falcons. They add that the inner ear exhibits characteristics similar to birds without acrobatic flight, which suggests soaring flight, and that it inhabited open areas without much vegetation. These results suggest that Argentavis was a scavenger or maybe even a kleptoparasitic bird, relying more on vision than on smell. This bird could have, quote, competed aggressively to steal food from other animals, a behavior seen in large, cognitively advanced birds, say the authors. Its brain, quote, aligns with that of opportunistic and predatory birds rather than with Cathartidae, which are vultures, leading to speculation that Dromaeosauridae may have been more predatory than the latter. And that wraps up the news. So to recap, here's the big summary of all the things we've learned today. Avialans and the origins of birds is still dated to the mysterious dark ages of the early Jurassic fossil record, where their story remains untold. But it's hypothesized that a lineage of dinosaurs that had achieved flight with asymmetrical feathers is the ancestor to Peniraptorans and Maniraptorans, who subsequently became secondarily flightless, hence why Dinosaurs are so bird-like, yet so different from the Avialan lineage, which begins with Anchiornis. Our first article reveals, if non-avian dinosaurs gained flight, and then the dromaeosaurs became secondarily flightless, the evolution of their feathers after becoming flightless is inconsistent with their observations of extant bird lineages that became secondarily flightless. The feathers of dromaeosaurs don't share consistent features as penguins, ostriches, and cassowaries, for example. Further supporting the theory of a volant early Jurassic ancestor is another study that links the deep ear canal that's well suited for airborne listening, which is present in birds, to Coelurosaurian dinosaurs, which are so distantly related to birds that you have to go back to a probable early Jurassic ancestor that's yet to be discovered. And more interesting, why would Coelurosaurians have features that are adapted for airborne listening? Might we interpret this as more evidence that there is a volant early Jurassic ancestor that was flying so long ago that it returned to the ground and further evolved into the dromaeosaurs and oviraptors and things like that? I don't know. The Anchiornis skull has been freshly described, revealing a very dromaeosaurid-like skull, but even with its thorough new description, comparing it against its peers is fraught with complications because its peers are mostly crushed and busted, and it's hard to draw conclusions from compromised data. A closer inspection on Anchiornis feathers and wings suggests that its irregular molt patterns strongly work against an interpretation that this taxon was capable of flight, but they did get a great insight into the animal's coloring. The 2025 description of Baminornis from the Tithonian pushes back the first observed pygostyle by 20 million years into the late Jurassic. It raises a series of new questions on how pygostyles evolved and whether they evolved multiple times in the Avialan line, or that longer and later pygostyles somehow grew longer and then shorter again. A new species of Gorgonavis was uncovered in Spain, making it the, quote, first adult cranial remains of a bird from this fossil site, and its slender and elongated rostrum in which teeth are restricted to the premaxillary corpus encourage its interpretation as a longipterygid, the first known from this time and place. Gorgonavis, quote, represents the oldest occurrence of an enantiornithine with relative rostral elongation outside the J-hole biota. The new discovery suggests that some specialized early enantiornithine lineages had a broader geographical and more ecologically diverse distribution than previously thought. And with the description of the 14th specimen of Archaeopteryx, a new study looked into the feeding apparatus and whether it had indicators that helped early birds ingest enough fuel to meet the caloric burden of flying. The authors found 3 specific avian traits: a bill tip organ, a basihyal structure in the rostrum, and the oral papillae. And this new data suggests, quote, that the sensitive and highly efficient avian rostrum evolved early in avian evolution and may reflect a shift in feeding behavior close to the origin of aves, possibly reflecting the advent of flight. The more I hear about how even the earliest of early birds already had such advanced avian adaptations, I can't help recall a conversation I had with Dr. Spencer Lucas from the New Mexico Museum of Natural History and Science in episode 62, Hammond. And we were discussing Coelophysis, a late Triassic theropod, and he was describing how even the earliest dinosaurs were already very, very bird-like. It's just amazing stuff. These latest discoveries, along with a newly described skull of a late Cretaceous loon, or grebe called Vegavis, show that the late Jurassic already featured a global distribution of advanced bird-like features, and that the big explosion in diversification and radiation in extant birds was definitely closer to the end of the Cretaceous, even though it's not yet well understood whether it was before or after the end Cretaceous extinction event. There's apparently evidence suggesting it could have been before or after. Nonetheless, back in the Aptian age of the early Cretaceous, the Deinonychosaurian features of birds were fading as the avian form we're presently familiar with was beginning to emerge. In the species Paraves, this animal was losing teeth, its forearms were becoming much more robust, and its feet were becoming more suitable for perching. All details we'll commonly expect to find in birds, but these were considered odd for Enantiornithines 125 million years ago. The forested environments of the Geophytang Formation of the Aptian are continuing to yield incredible discoveries, including preservations so great that the melanosomes of feathers can be analyzed, and it shows that Shan Yang, a small crested Enantiornithine, had red to iridescent coloring in its head crest, and it may have been able to adjust the colors from red to deep blue by how the light reflected off the feather. That would have been useful for signaling mates as well as fitting in with its tropical environment. The new Neobohyornis is a very small bohyornithid from the Geophytang Formation, which had reduced manual claws and a greater number of sacral vertebrae, which were likely adaptations for refined flight, and they demonstrate that bohyornithids had a pair of long streaming feathers on their tails, and that their size varied in greater diversity than previously known. The new Chromiornis funki has a strange collection of gastroliths found near its neck, which is confusing researchers, but it's offered the hypothesis that early birds with small or absent gastric mills, quote, may reflect a cost-benefit balance between increased digestive capabilities, the energetic cost of foraging for stones, and decreased flight functionality in stem avian lineages, which lack the full suite of skeletal adaptations for advanced flight capabilities observed in ornithuromorphs. Another different type of morphology that demonstrates the, quote, greater diversity of these animals is the short-pubed novavis, whose strange ischium may indicate that this little bird may not have had a high contraction speed in its tail feathers, but the diversity of enantiornithines has grown in distinct ways in these last few years. For Microraptor analysis, more than a dozen specimens have now formally been described, and authors are continuing to answer the riddle as to how the four feathered appendages on this dinosaur worked. New data suggests Microraptor, quote, had a complex behavior that made it adapted to arboreal and terrestrial habitats. Another study investigated how the feathers and forelimbs work together to provide lift and aerodynamics. The authors suggest that Microraptor's progress and experimentation with using forelimbs and all those feathers may have been an influential moment in the evolution of powered flight, as future species eliminated forelimbs enabled powered flight to develop as we know it today. Then in the mid-Cretaceous of Korea, the first avian egg has been described in its beautiful name, Ongwanulithus aphaeoduensis, made telling the story about fossilized eggs totally worth it. These are bitty eggs, about 15 centimeters long, but they're distinctly avian, say the authors. The Santonian-aged Navaornis from Brazil, preserved with an incredible skull that indicates that enantiornithines and crown birds share a very similar skull shape. Thus, the skull shape must have been shared by a common ancestor. But it was a surprise to the authors because their common ancestor was from 50 million years back. In this way, they were surprised that this cranial shape is a shared trait, and that the modern bird's skull shape dates back to 130 million years ago. A new dataset and phylogenetic analysis on Unenlagiides indicates that they are outside the Dromaeosaurid family, and the authors of this paper suggest that studying Unenlagiides is a great place to look for input on the morpho-functional changes during the acquisition of powered flight in future studies. Some old bird tracks in an Argentinian slab were formally described so that they can be scientifically and officially referred to, even though it took quite a bit of collaboration, but now Patagonichornis venetiorum has an official description. 3 new large-bodied avisaurids were described, including the newly named Avisaurus darwini and Magnusavis eclacensis. Together, these big birds continue to show that avifauna in the Maastrichtian appears to have been trending to larger birds, and it may play a role in their survival of the end Cretaceous extinction event. And in Vegavis news, there was a lot. Studies have further informed the interpretation of Vegavis as more like a diving bird with a foot propelled swimming like a loon, as opposed to a duck. And 2 new species of Vegavis have been named, suggesting that there were a variety of these types of birds sharing the Antarctic marine environment during the final days of the dinosaurs. And we wrapped all of this up with a quick article about the biggest bird of them all, the Argentavis, where researchers looked at its brain and compared it to extant birds and feel that their data suggests that this was a visually informed bird that patrolled over large areas using its great size and cognitive abilities to steal food from others. And though resembling vultures, it may have been far more predatory than these birds are today. Alright, after all that, I hope that you feel like you're more caught up on what's been published on Avialans lately. Thanks for tuning in to Dinosaurs Lately. If you'd like to find links to the materials discussed on today's show, you can visit dinosaurs-lately.blogspot.com, which is a companion piece of the Dinosaurs Lately podcast. A special thanks to Hector and to Ben Chrysler at the Dinosaur mailing list for all his contributions that makes wrangling all these news stories possible. And a special commemorative thank you to Dr. Hans-Dieter Sues. May he rest in peace. Remember, I have a new PDF on Ankylosaurs. If you'd like a copy, just send me an email and I'll forward it over to you free of charge. And if you'd like to request a family of dinosaurs to focus on for an upcoming episode, you can drop me a line to request that too. Dinosaurs Lately is a companion show to the Juras-Sick Park-Cast, the podcast where guests chat with me about Michael Crichton's 1990 novel Juras-Sick Park, and also not that too. If you'd like to be a guest on that show, you can reach me at ryansrogers@gmail.com. These podcasts are part of a Spring Chicken's banner of amateur intellectual properties, including the Spring Chicken's Funny Pages, 2 of the Undead graphic novel, the Second Lapse graphic novelettes, the Infantry, and the worst of them all, the King Street Capers. You can find links to all that baggage in the show notes or by visiting the schickens.blogspot.com. You can connect and follow on Facebook at facebook.com/springchickencapers, on YouTube by searching for the Juras-Sick Park-Cast podcast, on Tumblr at Mr. Rogers22, on X at RogersRyan22, or on Blue Sky at rogersryan22.bsky.social. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you feel you're all caught up on Avialans for now. Until next time.